I'm Theresa Mansour, and I'm the third from the top. And we're going to continue these questions on a beautiful Sunday, May 18th, 2008. So, Dad, tell us, you had a story about Uncle Johnny and the ringer. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I have to go back to when we were all in grade school, and Mother, I recall Mother would do the wash. She would somehow roll this wash machine into the...
Can we start over again?
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Start over again?
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Start now?
Right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm Theresa Mansour, and it's Sunday, May 18th, 2008, and we're going to continue this interview with Dad. I'm the third from the top, by the way. So, Dad, tell us a little bit more about Uncle Johnny and the ringer. You had a good story about that.
First of all, good morning. Good to see you
Good
here
morning.
with us, Teresa, in the interview. And thank you, Theo, for doing this work for us. Well, Uncle Johnny was, this is back in grade school days, when we were little kids. Uncle Johnny was in the area where Mother was washing, and I do recall this machine, it's this type of wringer that that two big rollers roll, and that's what you put the clothes in, and as it's rolling, it squishes the water out of the clothes, and then you hang it. There was no dryer. That dryer was the outside fresh air. So Uncle Johnny was watching Mother do this, so he apparently was holding one of the cloths or one of the whatever, a towel, and forgot to release his hand as it was getting close to the wringer, and then his hand got caught in the wringer. And then the panic situation, there is a release, and Mother came to the rescue and pushed it. But if you look at Uncle Johnny's arm, you'll see these marks on the backside of his arm, showing the stretch marks or whatever you call those. But that's the story, and those are things that as kids we would try to help Mom out. And so Uncle Johnny probably was standing on a chair and doing this. And this washing machine is big round thing with the lid on top, and you could take the clothes out and you push it in, and it drains right back into the machine. I don't think you see many of these machines even as, you'd have to go to an antique place to recognize this kind of roller and mechanism. And they even had one machine I remember Mother had that was upstairs that was gas driven. It was motorized, gas motorized, and it had an exhaust that you stuck out the window. Very interesting. Well, that's the story there.
Thank you. That was great. The next question, who do you most resemble, maybe not necessarily physically, but personality-wise, your mom or your dad?
Well, that's a tough question, Teresa. Mother and Dad had great qualities. They were, I believe, a beautiful match. They were. Dad wasn't I recall every time we would sit down and eat in the evening meal, Dad would listen. And then at some point during the meal, he would sit down and reflect on what we're talking about and give us a deeper perspective, a deeper value of what we were talking about and about life. But Mother was quiet. But her action, her body language and her action showed how much heart she had in each one of us, her concern for each one of us. I mean, she stood up for us. She was very strong. Mother physically was strong, and emotionally and mentally. And you've got to put that in perspective of the hard times. This is coming after the Depression and during the Second World War. So you had to be, you had to have some strength in you, some moral fiber that gives you that ability to stand for what is right and what is good for a family. They were very good. I was, all of us as a family were very fortunate to have good parents. And before each meal we prayed, and then at the end of after meal and the dishes were done, we stood around the table and said the rosary. I remember many, many times we would just, out of the struggle of the times, we prayed for peace in the world because of the war, and then for success in our family. So those things, you know, are embedded in your mind, and I hope that's what. I know I'm not quite answering the question,
Oh, that was
Theresa,
great. That was great.
but you know, where do these come from? These qualities, you know, and I hope I share in both of them. That's what made each one of us good. We're all really siblings are very good. I'm very fortunate.
Didn't you have a story about your mom? She was so strong, and someone came to the door, and your mother chased them down.
Oh, this was. Well, I remember two incidents. This is back in Canada. They had in the fall, you had to get ready for the winter fires to get wood. So they would deliver the wood, and they had to be chopped in quarters or in halves, depending on its size. And these laborers would go around, and that's, you know, what they did, like mowing grass or something like that. Well, they brought their tools with them. And I guess this one particular gentleman that was doing the cutting, and he would come year after year, I'd recognize him. His name was Slim, tall, thin guy. And I guess I was bugging him or something, and he kind of aimed the axe in my direction. And my mother saw this, and I just remember this, this loud, screechy yell. I think that scared the whole neighborhood and the man himself. Not that he was going to hit me, but he was trying to tell me to, you know, get away. Then there was another incident where, this is back in Phoenix. We had the motel on Van Buren, and there was three entrances to the motel. And the one of them that is used the most was right by the office, and across the street was a bar that was very active on weekends. It was Harry's Capri. And the patrons would park right by the driveway so nobody could drive in during a busy Saturday evening. So I try to catch him and tell him, you know, guys, you know, don't park there. This one time this guy wasn't around and had left his door open. So I proceeded to move the car physically, put it in neutral, and push it. Well, he saw me from across the street, and he ran after me. Well, I tried to run away from him, so because he was in, I didn't know what mood he was in, but he wasn't very happy. So I ran. I remember we had at the motel. It was a big yard. I could see I was outrunning him, and I would grab the limbs of the tree to swing around because we were running pretty fast, and then he would go forward, and that gave me enough time now to run to the office. And my mother was in the kitchen preparing food, and she could see by my expression and my breathing that something was wrong. So this man's coming right behind me, and he opens the door, and my mother approaches him with a knife. So he backed away, and that was the end of that story.
It was very good. Thank you. Oh, the next question. Your parents felt strongly about passing on what kind of lessons?
Well, their own personal struggle to get to where, you know, to get to where they were, to raise a family. They came, you know, that's part of their roots. They, you know, mother left the old country, dad left the old country for a better way of life, without all the struggles that were going on at that time. So they came with that and the struggles that they had in raising a family, with all of the economic situations and the deprivation of a lot of the goods that you could not buy. So, you know, those are the things that, you know, they managed. You know, we never went hungry, and we were never without clothes. So, you know, the basic needs were always provided. And mother was an excellent cook. And so that, you know, those are the things that, you know, that the heart, you didn't need all the material goods that we have today to make life work. those things that they had were just beautiful. They were great. We learned from that, and we got along with minimal amount of anything. Each one of us had chores to do, and I remember Uncle Johnny and I would sell the Sudbury Star newspaper in the winter months when it was so cold. We would stand in the the breezeways so the wind wouldn't be so cold on us, or that we wouldn't get ice, or frostbite. So those days, and we watched the miners getting off work. We would try to sell them newspapers or anybody, and it was just 5 cents a paper. But, a penny here and a penny there made us accumulate some money.
Great. What gifts really stick in your memory?
What was that?
It says, what gifts really stick in your memory? I'm not sure if they're talking about material, but what gifts stick in your memory?
Well, I remember a bicycle that I got, and I was so happy with that. That was big. That was something big to get a bicycle. And the neighbor next door, the Hennessy's, Nora Hennessy, would take time out to teach me how to stay on it.
How old were you?
It was grade school years, those early years, and had a little, we made a little scooter type. We had to make them out of wood and wheels, and you just accumulated things, and the neighbors would try to help you. That was good, and those are the gifts. At Christmas time, my godparents would always give me, I think, mostly food baskets. Those were big items to get that as a gift. I think those are the big things that we got as gifts.
Thank you. Your godparents are a special adult in your life growing up. Who would that be?
Well, my godmother was Aunt Rose. That was Uncle Charlie's wife. That's Barbara and Father Simon's mother. She was a godparent, and she was very kind to us. She was both godchild to Aunt Pauline, too. So
right.
Both of us. So she was always very generous and gave us good gifts. They were very good gifts. My godfather was Uncle Holmesy, and he wasn't his personality wasn't the kindest, and he was I would say he was more a rigid, firm man, not a very happy person either, it seemed to me. As kids you gather that. When you're around people that they don't open up to you. You don't bond with them. There was this, and while with Aunt Rose, she was always kind. She took us in, and she was a good godmother to us, to Aunt Pauline and myself.
Wonderful. Your home, your neighborhood, your family car, what do you remember, and tell us about those?
Well, we lived at 196 Elm. That's where that was the only home we all lived there, actually, and that's the only home that I remember.
Sudbury.
And in Sudbury, and the only move we ever made from Sudbury to Phoenix. So the only home we ever had was at 196 Elm, and across the street from our house was the cenotaph, the courthouse, and the jail. And fortunately for that jail, there was a big yard, and that's where we'd play on their grass. And then we'd hear the prisoners. You could see them through the bars, yelling or talking, and they would. It was a very active jail. And I forgot the name, what you call the jail man that ran the house. He had kids, and they would invite us into the jailhouse. But the residents stayed on top, the second floor. They had their own residence in the jailhouse. So they invite us over, and that was quite a treat for us to go upstairs and play with the kids there. So that was different. You don't find that today. They wouldn't allow that today. Then the neighbors to the south of our house were the Hennessy's. First the Vlinskys, they sold out, and the Hennessy's moved in. And the Vlinskys were in the, I think, the fur business or some kind of business like that. And they were quiet people. And I do recall growing up that during the Easter time and during the crucifixion, we would accuse them of killing Christ. I know that wasn't very kind, but as kids, we would hear the relationship of who killed Christ and the times. We associated that with their nationality, and that was wrong. But that's kids. That's what we did. So that was they sold out to the Hennessy's, and the Hennessy's had older children, but they were very kind to us. They were very good neighbors. Then the neighbors to the opposite side was, and I can't remember, Simpsons, and they were English, and they would hire me or pay me to shovel the snow. I recall that, and also if I remember right, I think they were the ones that would, beer, you couldn't sell beer. There was difficult times for the breweries and the beer. I think people used to go there and buy beer. For some reason, there was something like that in my memory, that someone on this block had beer, that people would go there. They were nice. They were very good to us, too. They had a big house. And those are the two that and then further up the street, there was a LaPointe family, and then on the top of the hill there was a couple other families we knew up there. Those are the kind of the area that we associated with right there. A lot of our activities were at school and church, and then the Boy Scouts. So Uncle Johnny and I were in Boy Scouts. So that was good. And we went to camp, summer camps. That was a very good experience for us. And I may have mentioned this in another interview. President Roosevelt was summer camping not too far from where the Boy Scout camp, and we tried to find out a route to go there, but we never could make it. We had to get back. But that would have been interesting if we were able to get to see President Roosevelt at that time. So that's our story there, Theresa.
Did the Hennessy's have children your age?
No, they were older.
Oh, okay.
They were older. They eventually she became a nurse and went to the West Coast, British Columbia, and her brothers were engineer, and the other one I think was engineer, and the other one was a city manager in our city that stayed there. And their children became very close to Father Simon, and she gave the eulogy at Father Simon's death.
The daughter.
Yeah, so that would be their grandchild, and it was a beautiful. They came very close to Father Simon. He would go to Lake Panage, and they had a summer camp, and Father Simon was the summer priest for that whole area, and there was the La France that was there too. So that was a beautiful memory right there.
Tell me about the cars that you drove back then.
Well, I didn't drive until I came to Phoenix.
Did your parents have?
Oh, they had a car, yes. Boy, do I remember. I can't remember the kind. For some reason, it was a Pontiac or something like that. But we would all crowd in there in the summer months, and when the weather was right, we'd go to picnic right after church. Mother would prepare all the foods, and we'd go right out into the bush country, and pick blueberries or just walk around out in the country and Now and then Uncle Joe would bring a friend with him. There was one by the name of the Pope family. And they would just have fun. We just had fun as kids. We entertained each other, walking around. And I remember once Uncle Johnny found $4, and we labeled that hill where we went, $4 Hill. Every time we drove by, there was $4 Hill. It was wrapped up. And I heard later on that area became the city dump. So that was the end of that story.
Okay, a habit, characteristic, or value you picked during your early years. So what kind of habits or characteristics or values did you pick up during your early years?
Some of my siblings could tell me that story better than I can. Theresa, I find that one a little difficult. Habits.
Characteristics.
Okay. I knew I was mechanically inclined. I found myself doing a lot of, work with wood and, fix up. I learned how to change fuses early, and I learned how you could bypass a burnt fuse. In those days, they were screw-type fuses. You unscrew it and you put a penny in there, and it's perfectly illegal. You don't do that because you're bypassing the whole electrical system. It has no protection. You can, burn the house down. But in an emergency, this is what we learned. We unscrew it, stick a penny in there, and screw it back in, and that put the lights back on, or the power back on wherever it was servicing. I learned how to do that. And these different little traits. I helped Mother out. I would go quite often. On Saturday morning, the markets were open. She would get the fresh fruit and the vegetables from the people would bring it in to the market. And I remember one incident going with Mother, and there was still the black ice. That's the term they would use, where you're stepping on the ground, and it looks perfectly perfectly fine to hold your foot, but there would be a sheet of ice that you couldn't recognize quickly. And I remember Mother stepping on that and falling down.
That's good. That's good. Okay, our families usually ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in which ways? So
we would have warm porridge. Mother made a lot of porridge, and there was cold cereal. Lunches were our formal meal was in the evenings when we'd all sit down. But I know we always had snacks. Mother always had something ready for us. We'd come out from playing or wherever we're at. She'd have some food ready for us, ready to give. Now in the winter months, that stove, the wooden stove, stayed hot all the time. So she'd keep something on the stove, whether it be something to make. It was always available. And the refrigerators were not big refrigerators like you have today. They were very small, so that was limited in capacity. But because of the weather, a lot of stuff you didn't have to refrigerate. You just, you kept them on the porch or in the basement. And they did a lot of canning, a lot of fruit canning. That was a common thing to do in those days. In the summer months, you prepare whatever the season was, whether it be pears, peaches, or strawberries, or anything that was grown at that time would come to the market, and you buy them in bushels and then bring them home, and we'd all pitch in to help Mom.
Do you have a favorite dinner that your mom would make?
We loved her grape leaves, kousa, cabinet. These were, they were great. And every time my sisters or brother would have company, they'd look at those rolled grape leaves and say, "Pass those cigars around."
How about Thanksgiving or other major holidays? What did you usually do for those holidays?
Well, there were big events in our house. All the celebrations, all the major feast days were a celebration in our house. Big meals. We didn't have a lot of. My sisters and brothers were older, so they would always have company over or guests over, and Mother and Dad would have some of the relatives over. Uh, they were big events in our house. We all sat down, and they shared stories, and we would listen.
Who would be invited? Would it be your family and friends?
Well, mostly it was my brothers or sisters, the older ones, would have a friend or a cousin over, or a relative. And we all sat down around the table. We had a big wooden oak table and oak chairs that would fit right around the whole thing, around the table. And Mother would she'd bake quite a bit. There was always food left over.
Aunts and uncles, did you have any?
Sometime, remember I don't remember a lot of aunts and uncles. I remember company coming, uncles, and then not on a lot of occasions, mostly it was their children that would come.
Your family celebrated Christmas and other holidays in which ways? I know you touched on it, but Christmas, how did they?
Well, Christmas, remember, that was a big treat because they would go to the market, and that's where we bought the Christmas tree. And they were big, huge trees, and we would put it in a wagon, and Uncle Johnny and I would drag it home and bring it, and then bring it in the house, and to fix that stand to hold it in the center, and put water in it. We knew in those days you got to keep water in that tree, and then we helped decorate it. Everybody pitched in, and that was a big celebration for us. You know, we're out of school, and we had a piano, and they played Christmas carols, and we all sang around it, and we sang French carols because we all went to a French school, and that was our special treat.
Who played the piano?
Nobody in our family played. We had people that come, and then we also had a player piano.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, one that you had to pump with your feet,
You're right.
and that was fun. I remember putting the rolls in there, and pumping, and watching those little keys go up and down. That was good.
That was neat. Person in your family who stood out from the rest as maybe funnier or studious, messier, or temperamental? Tell me about the people in your family who stood out and their personalities.
Well, you remember the youngest of the family watches the older ones, and they're the ones that set the example and their achievement. Aunt Helen was going to be a nurse. She was in nursing school, and that was inspiring to us to see, boy, that's great. And Uncle Joe was going to Sacred Heart College, so we knew that, you know, there's something after grade school, after high school, and that you know, told us that there was this challenge. And Aunt Genevieve was going to a business college for secretarial work. So you see these things and you say, oh, and if they could do it, I can do it. So that was kind of our well, for me it was inspiring. And they're very, very caring to all of us. They would spend time with us, tell us stories. Aunt Helen tell us her experience in the nursing school, and then her taking care of the patients and the work, and Uncle Joe and his you know, all the studies he would do, and he was a very good reader, and we noticed he would tell us all the stories that he would be reading and about the books, and we as little ones we enjoyed this. Those were great to us. And then Aunt Genevieve was full of laughter, full of fun, so that was good. Then Aunt Nora was quieter than the others, and we saw how she was doing, and that was good. So the three younger ones were watching the older ones in their growth and development, and that was our guide.
How would they say you were?
Well, we'd have to ask them that. And we hope during these sessions we'll be able to sit down and have my siblings sit down and tell stories and reflect on each other. I'm looking forward to that.
That would be
And I'm
good.
looking forward to all of you getting together, tell us stories how you were raised.
I look forward to that too. Well, let's see. That was one more.
I'm winding it down.
Oh, no.
Wrap it up. Last one.
Oh, no, that was the last
That
question.
was the last one. Thank you so much. That was the last question.
That was the end?
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, I'm Peter Davis. Paul's my dad, and Shirley's my mom, and I'm the second oldest. I'm right under Mary Ann. And next after me is Theresa. I have a few questions, Dad, for you.
I'm ready?
Okay. I've watched a bit of the earlier videos, so I wanted to ask a couple questions to kind of supplement some of the things I saw. I was going to ask if you knew why your mother left the Middle East, or her family left the Middle East in Damascus, and the same for your father, if you know why his mother and his father left the Middle East, and he also left, I think, when he was a young child.
Well, the tapes that we did for on Uncle Charlie gave me a lot of depth in that. There was such a struggle at that time in the Middle East. There was a lot of just the economic situation was terrible. And then keep in mind they had a lot of relatives that have already left the Middle East and were out here and sending money back there. And they looked at America, as the land of opportunity. If you want to get ahead and develop your talents, your God-given talents, this is a place to go. And these are older countries, from Lebanon and Syria, and they were pretty well established. And I can picture this in my mind that, they had to have some clout or something to get ahead. It isn't, what your abilities or anything. There was control. And add that on top of the bad economic situation, then it gets really suppressed. So they saw all of this, people that have their relatives sending money and telling them about, oh, look how they're doing so well out here. That says, oh, this is a place to go. And they knew how fast America was growing. They looked at this as an opportunity. So as soon as, and the money that they were getting to come over here was coming from their relatives, their aunts and uncles. They'll have to work 2 or 3 or 4 years to generate enough money to have someone come to America and join them. And they did that. They sacrificed that labor. So that I see as part of the struggle of the hardship of leaving your parents and leaving the roots of where they grew up, to the opportunities of going to another country, to America. And I think and I hope that they, a lot of them, they'll say, yeah, we're going to go make our money, then come back. But once they get back over here and established, and they get married and they have a family, and then it changes. And then on top of that, then the Second World War came in, and there was no more travel. So that cut that dream out of going back, earning a few dollars and come back. That stopped that. So after the Second World War, and they went through the Depression and then the Second World War, then by that time they have children, they've already established their business and their roots. So that dream really fell by the wayside.
Dad, do you know about what year it was that, because I seem to recall that your father's father came first and went to, I believe, Detroit. And then your mother came afterwards with the kids, with your father's, your grandmother, I'm sorry,
Okay.
your father's mother.
All right. Well, first of all, my grandfather, my father's father, we know very little about it. Somehow, I don't know where he landed, or where he lived. Was it Detroit or anything? A lot of the relatives were in Detroit. That's true, and we could assume that they went to Detroit, and he went on to Chicago through some connection or something, and then the story is he got sick in Chicago and died there, and some relating this to food poisoning or in that area right there. Well, and they tried to, go through the county records and find out what happened. They've never been able to find that, but they know that's where he went, and they heard no more from him after that. So, but you're right. The main route was address was in Detroit. That's where they kind of started there, and then they started to go north. They felt there was other relatives in northern Ontario that were doing very well. And when I say very well, they had a lot of opportunity to peddle. That was the main business. So they would go to the farmhouses, to the lumber camps, the mining camps, and they would sell all their goods and come out. And I'm hoping that at some point we will be able to get Uncle Charlie gives a very excellent description how they got involved in this peddling, and how he and Grandma would go together to peddle. And he tells the story how he knew enough English that he would knock at the door, and he says he would put his foot in the door so that people couldn't close it on them, and Grandma would show the goods, and he was like the interpreter because he was just a young kid. But I hope you'll get a chance to hear those stories. It's very detailed. He tells how, with a good sense of humor, how the struggle came about, and the differences he had with Grandma, her way, and the way she wanted to do things, and he come from a different way of trying to succeed in business. And he tells the story very vividly and accurately.
Was this before World War I, before World War II? Was it in that time frame right in there? Was it maybe in the late 1800s?
No. This was before the Depression and before World War II. So this would be the early 1900s.
Okay, and that's about when they came over, right?
That's about that time, yes.
Okay, great. And then on your mother's side?
On my mother's side, she had a brother who was in Detroit, and he worked for General Motors, and I think it was Fisher Body. And at that time, remember, automobiles were starting to get into the production line, and they were looking for a lot of help. And that's, I assume Fisher because that's where he retired from, and he worked there many years. And that was the base camp. So when Mother and her sister came, that's where they stayed, right there. And I tell the story earlier in these interviews that they belonged to the church there, the Maronite church. That's where they were going. And the local priest knew the family, knew Uncle Khalil and his two sisters. And Father was, through his relatives, were in the church. And that's how they connected. I have to assume that somehow the priest took them to the family, or they met in the church, or there was a way that the two of them got to meet each other, and that's where they got married.
And I heard that story before too, Dad, on the earlier tape. Your mother, do you know the reasons why she left? Was it also like the economic reasons, like on your father's side?
Absolutely.
Or was it some other reasons?
No,
as well?
no. They struggled. Mother and her family, they were a seamstress, and she tells how they made the uniforms for the soldiers, and she says they worked, hours and hours, and she would be so tired she'd fall asleep at the sewing machine.
This was in
This
Damascus?
was in Damascus, and they made very, very little money. Just to survive, they made very little money.
Mm.
So and they felt that there must be a better way to life.
This
And
was
they're
also before the Depression and before
Yes.
World War II.
Right.
So she came over in about the same time frame too.
I think a little, father came earlier, mother came a little bit later, and I have those dates, and I should give them to you,
That's
but
okay.
they're, I think she came over 1916, mother with her
Oh,
sister.
wow, really?
Yeah, and dad came before that, several years before that. So you could associate, but the bigger struggle was in the Middle East. They were struggling terrible. There was quite a depression at that time,
Mhm.
and that this was a way to get out of this.
Did
Just
you ever-
leave the country.
Did they ever mention the Ottoman Turks, the Turks being there?
Well, yeah, mother did quite a bit in her stories how they were how her relatives were slaughtered and killed because they were Christians, and how she had to and the way they would go to church, they would have these underground churches, and there's another word for that that they would describe it.
Yeah,
You know,
catacombs.
catacombs.
Is that it?
The catacombs.
Okay.
And they would go and they knew in the village where they could go to church and pray, and they would have these catacombs, and this was the way that they were able to worship. This was a lot of them. She talks about her relatives being slaughtered from the Muslims, basically. And that's the way it was in those days, to get out for even, you see, we talk about economic, and I'm sure there was religious freedom and tied under this too, to get out of the country to a certain extent.
I want to kind of continue with that theme. And when your family came here to the U.S., was there any prejudice that they experienced, or was it, did they fit right in? I've heard some stories from time to time about some events, and that maybe the Davis name was not only changed because it was a name they liked, but also because it would have fit in. And I've heard Charlie was also involved in some situations in Sudbury, Uncle Charlie, where they were prejudiced. There were prejudiced actions against him. But I'm not sure. I've just heard this anecdotally, and I thought maybe you'd comment on it.
Well, Uncle Charlie, when we listened to his interview, he just adopted the name. It just came to his mind to use that name. And once he used it, people they grasped it. And he says it didn't become official until he had to go to court on some issue about a fire claim, and that's when they officially made the name Davis. So that came a few years later. The insurance company was trying to show where he manipulated the loss, and they were trying to show there was fraud, and he was able to stand up in the court and explain the whole situation and win.
Okay, that
and
probably
win.
is the story I think I'm thinking of.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard about, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. He had Uncle Charlie had a very sharp mind, and like many of the people from the Middle East, they use their mind a lot. They train their mind to do a lot of this research in their head, not on paper. And that's the beauty of that ability to use your mind and train it that well. Did I fully answer that question, Peter, or is there more to that?
No, I think that's it. You know, from time to time, people who came from the Middle East, particularly those who came to the South, like the southern part of the U.S.,
Yeah.
there are stories that are coming out now about how they experienced some level of prejudice when they came over. They're not seeing that now, but that was
Yeah.
the case back then. And but I didn't know if that had occurred. I know that in Sudbury that the ethnicity is primarily
French and English.
French and English, correct.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if in the mining town if there were issues.
I felt we fit in the neutral zone,
Okay.
where we could go either way and not get hurt.
Either French or the
or
English.
English. Yeah, we know all of us went to a French school, And most of our cousins went to French school. So we were kind of neutral. I mean, we could be negotiators.
Because that was the real conflict,
That's
as
right.
opposed to in the South, where it was more racially oriented in the
Right.
southern part of the U.S. Interesting.
But yeah, there was, yes, there was, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there was clashes, you know, and between the English and the French. And even in Sudbury, they felt very strong that the English were the supreme race. And they, you know, and everybody else was subordinate.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was the mental makeup of the people.
Mhm.
And, you know, and the games they played and everything, you could see the way the I can't use that word royalty, but I remember the English, you know, they had all the games controlled in a fashion that these were the upper level people, and these are the games we played, you know, the bowling green, the tennis, it was in that element. But I you know, that only lasted so long, and then they found out other people could do just as good.
And that's typically how it is. I wanted to ask a little bit about your Catholic faith, and particularly in light of your family. And it strikes me, growing up with you, Dad, that we cling to our Catholic faith very strongly. And oftentimes, I've thought that perhaps that comes from the fact that in the Middle East, it wasn't so easy to be Catholic, particularly at the time that my grandmother, your mother, left that area of the world, as you explained earlier. I thought you'd maybe just go into a little bit on the importance of the Catholic faith to you growing up, but also to your family growing up, and you know, the roots of that and where you see that comes from.
Well, I remember when we went to visit my mother's family in Damascus. Mom and I went there, and we could see that the church played a very important role. And that mother lived in the walled city, the old city of Damascus, and that's where that was the important place of their life. They would be going right in church. They take you to where the church is, where the community. This was the community. This was the struggle we had in keeping up our faith. And you remember that was ingrown into Mom's, grandma's background. They knew that struggle. And then I go to my father's side, and they had the same thing. In the village, they had 2 or 3 churches where Dad was. And that was the center of their life. That was the spirituality of their life. That's what the struggles they had were so strong, the only thing they had was their faith. So you put that into that perspective, and they brought that, you know, they, as a husband and wife team, brought that together, and we saw this in their way of teaching us and their example of their life. And then I saw that come to play more as the struggles we had as growing up. We found ourselves, you know, praying for peace at that time during the war. And before me, there was the economic crash, the depression, and I'm sure that my older brothers and sisters had to pray that we get out of that. Well, you know, they were rooted in prayer and the value of the sacraments. That was part of them. That was inside of them. And that's what you did. You know how much book learning they had on philosophy and logic, it was secondary. That was part of their nature. That was built in them. So they could prove that through their example and what struggles they had and their success and the guidance they got. So when Mom and I were raising the kids, we knew that value. It was already instilled, it's already rooted in us. You know, we're going now a few generations back, and we see, and they tell us, you know, and we're telling you kids that struggle does happen, and you need some basis, something to hold you together. What is it? You know, there's something that's got to be there. I hope. That gives you a good basis for it.
Yeah, that's really good. Dad, I wanted to ask about if you know if your father or mother were Melkites, Maronites. I know that you and your wife, Mom, Shirley, are in the Melkite church. But do you know your historical lineage in terms of Melkite, Maronite? Obviously, just as a side note, when you came here, it was all Roman Catholic because those churches weren't developed here yet. But maybe you could comment on that.
Well, with Dad, it was Maronite, and I don't think there was a question there. Dad's background, Maronite, and first of all, the village he came from, it's all Maronite. So that was a strong Maronite group there, and that's what it was historically. And that was in the in the mountains of they were preserving their faith too historically. Then that